Good afternoon everyone, Paxton. What were the motives of the predator Dek? And in general, what is known about this representative of the Yautja race? And here it is worth approaching the question of who is the predator Dek right here from afar, because the film Predator of the Wasteland for the first time shows us right here a bunch of new information from the culture of predators. True, the customs of predators may differ depending on different clans, because different clans and customs are different. Some predators live on their home planet, some predators on the captured one, and some have lived on their huge mother ships for thousands of years. And they are very similar to the customs of ancient Sparta, and all this may be a hint that the Spartans once could cross with predators in antiquity, and it was from predators that the Spartans adopted their teaching called the Goge. That is, in the clan of the predator Dek, it is accepted that if the child was born weak, or with some deviations, it is simply. Then they killed him. But apparently, when he was born, Dek looked completely normal. That is why he was able to live to the events of the film, but then at some stage his growth slowed down, and he began to lag behind other predators, because of which Dek gained the reputation of the smallest and smallest in the clan. Very low network goes wrong information that Rosdek 7 feet and 3 inches, that is, about 220 centimeters. But this is the growth of an ordinary predator, and fans agreed that to determine the growth of Dek, you need to compare it with the growth of actress Ella Fanning, who played Android 2, and the growth of the actress 170.5 centimeters. And since Dek is not much higher, then the growth of Dek is about 185-118 centimeters. In general, he is really small for a predator. But was his small stature the only reason for his father's hatred? No, and here it is worth touching. I won't break it down in too much detail because the comic deserves a separate video, but still, according to the comic, at some point his father assigned Dek a seemingly simple mission to rescue some of the technology of an abandoned spaceship that crashed on the moon Belkonen 4 10.1 thousand years ago. However, finding himself inside the ship, Dek discovers that there is an ancient, technologically advanced and deadly threat that has turned him from hunter to prey. It was after this that the father finally considered Dek weak and ordered his eldest son Quay to kill Dek. But Dek's father, named New York, did not take into account the fact that the brothers got along very well with each other, and even more so at one time. It was Dek who saved your life. That is why the fact that Quay later saves his brother at the cost of his life is not nobility, but a pattern. After all, predators honor their code, which means that for Quay it was a matter of honor to save the life of someone who once saved his life. Initially, according to the script, Dek wanted to be blind, but this idea was quickly abandoned. Then there is a rumor that Dek is still blind in one eye, but nothing in the film indicates this. Well, at least visually. Unlike the same wolf predator from Requiem, who was actually blind in one eye due to the acid burn of strangers. As for the shape of the head and the predator, there is no Dek. These are not signs of his underdevelopment. The fact is that Dek is simply still very young, and his brother Quay, although older, he is also still a very young predator. According to the canon, predators can live 1000 years, but in the movie Predator 2, the predator was still considered very young, but his head shape was already normal, and his age was approximately 300 years. The three from Alien vs Predator were also still young, but their heads were again already normal, which means that by Predator standards, Dek and his brother were even younger, that is, they were still well under 100 years old. And by the dots on the forehead of predators, you can understand that earlier in the place of these dots there were also dreadlocks, which fall out over time, and the shape of the head changes as in Triceratops, whose crest increases over the years. This confirms that Nivor's head is already absolutely normal, and not the same as Dek's or Quay's, but nevertheless the whole. This clan is another completely new breed of predators, and there are very many breeds of predators. Well, like for example our Earth dogs. But the most interesting thing is, was my father correct in considering Dek weak? And then I remembered Royce's line from the movie Predators. He said,
"They hold greater strength than us in many ways, but heavier too."
That is, size and weight is one of the weaknesses of the predator, and most clearly we were able to see this in the film Prey, where with the help of cunning, agility and its small dimensions, Naru managed to overcome the predator of the savage. And the main answer is whether Dek was really weak compared to other predators. Lies in his battle with the coolest species. In fact, Dek was actually able to defeat the unkillable monster. As we saw when Dek cut off Kolitka's tail, Kolisticus was able to grow a new one, but this is also the most important thing. When Dek cuts off Kolitka's head, Kolisticus no longer grows a new head, but he grows it back. Severed head, that is. If Dek just threw Kolitka's head somewhere far away, Kolitka would no longer be able to grow it back. And the head is not a tail. Kolitka would no longer grow a new head. That is, if in the midst of the battle, Tessa had not suddenly appeared and frozen Dek and Dek had taken Kolicheska. He would have taken the second round and already learned that Kolicheska's severed head should be thrown somewhere far away. As soon as possible, he would have been able to finally defeat the monster. Why can't other predators do the same? After all, Thea said that many of me have already tried to kill Quantity, but they have all been killed. And the fact is that they were all larger, they were clumsy and massive, and the small weight and small height make Deko faster and more agile, especially in battle with larger opponents. That is, the stubbornness of Dek's father simply did not allow to see in his son his features to turn them into an advantage, and again, it was the agility and small height that allowed Dek at the end of the film to defeat first 2 guards at once and then the leader of the Clan I. By the way, let's remember the wolf predator from Requiem, because he is also quite small. Compared to other predators, he is much smaller than any young predator from Alien vs Predator, but at the same time it was the wolf who achieved that he became the liquidator of aliens. It was he who killed strangers in packs because he was small, agile and fast. Unlike the same Celtic predator who was huge, but even an ordinary one-on-one alien, he was never able to win. Another interesting observation is that all the predators in past films tended to rely on their technology and weapons rather than brute force. And when it came to brute force, the predators lost, and Dek, at the very beginning of his arrival, loses his bow and spear, breaks his wrist blades from the door of the ship, and W, he is left with only a sword, which, according to the director's comments, is actually large for him. Well, that is, for a second, Dex could defeat the unkillable Kolichesk only with the help of a ball, and then he broke it almost immediately. And then he relied simply on defensive means, ingenuity, and only half the ball. But the most interesting thing, this is that most likely, due to his youth, Dek has not yet taken root in an impeccable study of the Predator Code, and he is still quite flexible in his thinking, and he was able to accept a new concept of the meaning of his life. He was able to accept that the best in the clan is not the one who kills the most, but is the one who can protect everyone. He was able to transcend himself and accept help from others, and by the end of the film, he was already able to himself, in fact, ask for help from living beings from planet Gen. He was able to tame a snake and used explosive tracks as a weapon. And please note, any android in Welton is stronger than any person on Earth, even the Dacha of Harrigan. And here all the androids are also armed. And Dek, without his armor, without his weapons, without invisibility, was able to destroy simply an army of these androids, using only ingenuity and improvised means. And that's all when he's still very young. And imagine what a predator Dek will become when he will grow up, when his head shape changes to a classic shape and when he gets more experience. And I would definitely like to see a movie about it. And what do you think? After all that has been said, Predator Dek is really an underdeveloped short guy, or his height and low weight are his unique advantages, which allowed him to kill monsters many times more than himself and destroy an entire army of armed androids? Wayland to Tone, write about it in the comments. I think it's worth starting with the fact that the leader of the clan named New York is a collective image of 3 predators and 1 reference. This is, of course, the elder of 1 alien versus predator. Since the design of the predator in these 2 cases is very similar, but still these different breeds of predators in Alien versus Predator were classic, for which large heads with large foreheads are characteristic, but from the moment Dan Trachtenberg became at the helm of the Predator universe, he still in one of the first interviews stated that he never liked the classic design of Predators and their disproportionately large heads. And therefore, starting with the Savage Predator, all the Predators in his films have heads. They became smaller, and in fact, a new breed of Predators appeared within the universe too. The reference for the newer Predator was a vintage figure from the Kenner company, which was recently reissued by the company NEC. We don't hold Kenner very highly, and collectors, of which I am, and the Kidnapper collect figures more often. Not company, but in SS a Kenner figures are a real rarity, and the fact that Newer's appearance was drawn from an old Kenner figure called Clan Leader is a courtesy to old school collectors of figures in the Predator universe. But I, since I collect figures of the NEC company, will show you the similarity of the new. And the figure of the Clan Leader, on the example of the NEC figure, I do not have in my collection, but still, as we can see, the NEC Clan Leader has the same white dreadlocks, and his wrinkled face is very similar to the face of Newer, but the main thing is that the Clan Leader has a mask with horns, that Newer also has a horned mask. Well, 3 references. This is of course a reference to the Alpha Predator. The Alpha Predator is also primarily a figure from the NEC company, and this is the 100th anniversary figure of this company. And by this date they decided to close the gap in the history of the race of Predators and came up with a figure of a Predator with white dreadlocks and white skin, who was the first to raise a rebellion against, who killed a representative of the Ameng race and took over parts of his body as armor. In general, it was the Alpha Predator who gave birth to all these customs and hunting rules that Predators rely on to this day. So, I am sure that Newer's white dreadlocks are a reference not only to the leader of the Kenner or Nak clan, but also to the Alpha Predator, who also appeared later in the game Predator Hunting Grounds. And now let's move on to the youth of Newer, the Predator. And there is one very interesting point here. On the one hand, we don't seem to know anything about his youth, but on the other, for some reason, Sons Deck and Quay know that even. Newer fears an invincible threat looming over.
Kolicheska Aliski mentions this dynamic in depth.
But in order to be afraid of someone, you need to know what exactly to be afraid of, which means apparently Newer has already met Kolisk, and since he is afraid of him, it means that he could not kill him and was defeated. But at the same time, he survived and did not destroy himself to wash away his shame, although he was obliged to blow himself up according to the Predator code. I don't think the entire clan knows this information, otherwise Newer would have been overthrown and killed long ago, like that Predator from the animated anthology Predator, Killer of Killers. But for some reason, Newer told his eldest son Quay. Probably because he considered his eldest son his pride, he trusted him completely and therefore entrusted him with this secret. Why did Newer order his own to kill his youngest son? The main reason for Deck is not what was voiced in the film, well, the fact that Deck is just short, and he is the weakest of all. The true reason for Newer's hatred of his younger son Deck is revealed in the official Primate comic, which I have already made separate videos about. Well, in short, my father gave Deck the task of bringing a sample of technology from an old abandoned ship, but this technology is able to defend itself and adapt to its opponent. And it so happened that Deck seemed to win the fight, but the opponent eliminated himself with an explosion, because of which Deck was unable to get the sample he needed, technological logs, and bring it to his father. Father believed that this task was the simplest, but due to the fact that Deck could not fulfill even him, it was the last straw, and he ordered the eldest son Quay to kill Deck in his sleep. But was that the real reason I wanted to kill Deck? I think not. The fact is that Newer is already a very old Predator, and he is afraid that his power in the clan may be shaken if he shows weakness and allows his weak. In his opinion, his son will become part of the clan, and who of his clan will see this softness of heart of his leader? Someone may simply challenge him, and because of Newer's age, may no longer lead such a battle. And let's look at exactly how Newer fights as he begins his fight with eldest son Quay. He fights honestly at first, but once he realizes what he can do, he begins to use his invisibility cloak, and only with his help can he defeat his eldest son. And personally, I'm sure that if Newer hadn't used his cloak and Quay hadn't been distracted by launching the ship and saving Deck, then the outcome of the battle would have been completely different, especially since Quay is already a bloody Predator. That is, he already knew his first hunt, but what happened when Deck returned to take revenge? New York did not go with honor to fight his son, and he first sent 2 guards, which Deck gifted in just a couple of seconds. Only then, in full view of the entire clan, did New York himself enter the battle. But at the same time, as soon as he received his first damage, he immediately proceeded to his coward tactics and turned on the invisibility cloak. But this time, Deck anticipated his father's tactics because he had already seen it, and with the help of the ship's engines, he raised dust and thereby made his father visible. When Deck takes over New York, the father, in fear of death, tries to persuade Deck to retreat and join the clan, but this is a direct violation of the code because the predator surrenders and makes concessions for the sake of saving his life like a real coward. But Deck brings his revenge to the end, but at the same time he allows the cub to finish the job. That is, New York died of the only creature that he feared. That is, of Kolichesk, and not even of an adult, but of a teenager, which added even more humiliation to his death. After all, he killed his eldest son because he refused to kill his brother, who once saved his life, and all for the sake of his power. The clan has not wavered. Then he was defeated by his younger son, whom the whole clan considered weak and unworthy, but in the end he also died by the child of whom he himself feared. As far as I'm concerned, this is a worthy end for a predator who was willing to neglect the code and his sons for the sake of holding on to power. Overall, despite the fact that New York is the main antagonist of the film, I really like that his motives are very deep. He's not just some all correct and for the clan's frequency, and he concealed that he had once been defeated by Kalisk and had not killed himself as required by the code. He was afraid that if he accepted his youngest son into the clan, it would be a sign of a soft heart and someone in the clan would challenge him and overthrow him. He didn't go kill Deck himself because he knew that Quay would challenge him for it, and Quay, being a young bloody hunter and fighting with Quay in front of the whole clan without the invisibility cloak, didn't bring any Orba out of Poe. That's why he killed Quay somewhere far from the clan and used the invisibility cloak to gain an advantage, although the same fight in front of the clan would have embarrassed him. That's why before fighting Deck, he first sent the guard in. I hope she kills his youngest son and... But when this didn't happen, only then did he go into battle himself, and with the same damage, he began to use the invisibility cloak, which means that from that moment on, he no longer cared about honor and the fact that all this was happening before his eyes. The entire clan already feared only for his life, which makes him the most cowardly predator in the history of the franchise.
Quay.
In fact, pretty little is known about Quay in practice, so most of the information will be more my personal assumptions. But what is known for sure is that Quay is the eldest son and firstborn of clan chief Nior, and unlike his brother Deck, Quay has already earned his first hunt. He has already become a bloody predator and has even created his own valuable trophy board, but immediately there is ground for discussion. All the trophies from Quay's ship are his trophies. On the one hand, I am inclined to believe that the ship itself is of course Quay's ship, since when Quay sent Deco to the planet, Jenna New York could not with her remote stop the ship or blow it up, as she did. About the trophies. Despite the fact that it is known that at least some of the trophies on Quay's ship are definitely his trophy. Still, I'm sure not all trophies are his, I think, but this is just my assumption that each predator who represents his clan not only displays his personal trophies, but also displays some of the trophies from the collection of the best trophies of the entire clan, so that other Yauja who for one reason or another end up on the ship can understand by the trophy what exactly this clan is capable of. But these are my personal guesses, and they are based on the fact that Quay seems to have just recently become a bloody predator and has only done a few hunts, but his ship seems to have too many trophies for just a recently bloody predator. This has to do with human skulls, that is, either Quay was even on Earth or behind. Went to visit one of the colonies in Elon Teuton, But the most questions may arise with the skull of T-Rex, that is, a predator to howl, that is 65 million years old, but it can't be. No. And the answer to this question was given to us by Predators, the killer of killers, where we saw that predators can kidnap and freeze those who were once able to defeat predators, which means that predators may well have a couple of frozen T-Rex for battles in the arena. Plus, what prevents predators from simply using DNA to such creatures, keeping them in which one? They go to their laboratories and reproduce them. That is, predators can quite well constantly clone some specific T-Rex, well, Svirepov himself, and if necessary create a copy of it. So it is the skull of T-Rex. I think that this is still the skull of Quay, but some of the other trophies may belong to his father Niwar. But another skull is also interesting. It was shown to us only from the side, and it is impossible to fully determine whose skull it is, but many fans came to the fact that it is still the skull of a predator. Perhaps not of the same breed as an ordinary predator or super predator, but some kind, for example, from the Savage clan. And yes, I remind you again that I have already made a separate video for all the skulls from the film, so if you haven't seen it, I recommend watching it. And I lead to the fact that, according to the code of predators, a Yaoja can choose another Yaoja as a target for hunting. If he is considered bad or bad blood, and perhaps Quay has decided, why not try hunting his own kind? And so he was able to get such an unusual trophy. Quay is also distinguished by the fact that he very much honors the code and its rules, and this is indicated by 2 points at once. One, this is that Quay honors duty. Thanks, what is it? You can find out from my video on the codes of Sioux predators. So the duty of gratitude is the rule, according to which if someone once saved the life of a predator, the predator will be obliged, in a situation where the saviors will also be a threat to his life, to save his life in return, even at the cost of his own life, and this was clearly shown to us. In the movie, as you know, once in childhood, the younger brother Deg saved KV's life, and Deg that day lost one of his fangs. But also on the same day, Deg gave the older brother a toy. And Quay not only kept this toy to remember forever that day, but he also deeply respected and honored the younger brother's deed. But as a thank you to Wei, Deku actually replaced his father, as their own father was a selfish despot. All that was important to him was the status of his clan, and Quay became Deg's first example of the need to protect loved ones even. Damage to oneself, and 2 point that shows Quay's high moral qualities and his commitment to the code. This is his battle with his father. How do we know again? Quay was already a bloody predator, which means he already got his invisibility cloak, and we saw him use it while sparring with Stek at the beginning of the movie, but this. It was only sparring, and then Quay used the cloak only at the beginning, and according to the code before the attack, he was obliged to reveal himself, which he did, and then he no longer used his invisibility cloak, but already in a real combat situation, when he began to fight with his father, the father, violating the code, began to actively use his cloak. But New York almost immediately began to use the invisibility cloak. Whereas Quay, realizing that this is no longer sparring and that his life is in danger, did not use the cloak anyway, as the code forbids the use of an invisibility cloak during an open confrontation. I also want to draw your attention to a few moments in the battle with my father, because in fact, Clay personally defeated my father until he started using the invisibility cloak. At first, Quay holds the defense and effectively repels his father's sweeping blows. But then with his second blow, he disables Nior's plasma cannon, and with his third blow, he already deprives his father of his ball. Well, that is, at this point, Quay is completely. You continued to fight. Father was able to knock out Quay's sword and take it for himself. He began to attack his son with his sword. But Quay again effectively fought off with handcuffs. That is, even against the unarmed Quay, New York essentially could not oppose anything. It wasn't until New York started using invisibility that Quay started missing shots. And how? As we recall, there was a shield that could even fend off a plasma cannon shot, and Quay could use it and fend off his father. But apparently, the shield cannot be used according to the code during a battle with other Yaoja and even mortal danger. Quay didn't use any means of defense and respected the code. Quay followed the Yaoja code impeccably to the last and was faithful to his oath to save his brother from death. His faith in his younger brother was stronger than his father's orders or fear of him. And also an interesting moment, father ordered Quay to kill Dek in his sleep, since Dek disgraces the clan. But according to the code, I'm already entitled to my first hunt anyway, and as if Dek had just gone hunting and died for his father, nothing would have changed. He would have followed the code, sent Deko on the hunt, and gotten rid of him. He would have been right that he was a weakling, and as if fate itself so decided, and whose eldest son would not have to be killed. And neither the Horde violated just everything that was possible, and Quay, on the contrary, he understood that Dek has the right to his first hunt, and this right is higher than his father's orders about weapons care is also known little. But if you take into account that all the weapons on Quay's ship were purely his weapons, then those cryogenic grenades were his weapons, and let in the film itself, other weapons are almost not visible. Still, it can be considered in detail thanks to the extensive advertising campaign of the film with a lot of video from Clay's ship. Well, first let's look at the balls, two top balls, plus or minus the same, and we saw them in the movie, but the bottom sword. This is no longer a sword, but in its form it is a kind of analog of a police baton, only with a sharp blade on the outside. Next we see a belt with grenades, which appeared in the film. At the very top, a telescopic spear was also seen in the film, but in the middle you can see a dart gun, which looks very similar in appearance to a similar one. Well, then we see the KV folding shield, and here we see that the shield is not completely energy, but it has a metal bow contour, which was in the film on the left, two boomerangs from the film, as well as that same children's toy for children Yaoja, which explodes if you look into it. And also the Quay plasma cannon Tessa had taken. Its peculiarity is that, as a rule, the Predators have a laser sight on the mask, and representatives of the newer clan have sights on the guns themselves. And previously, this only happened in the movie Predator 2. As for Quay's appearance, the prototype of the Quay mask was definitely the Predator horn hat from the Dark Horus comics. I already mentioned it in the analysis of the Predator deck by the dimensions of Quay. Unlike deck, this is already an absolutely standard Predator with a height of approximately 2 meters 20 centimeters. But about the shape of the head here, everything is more interesting than it seems at first glance. As you can understand from the film, Dek and Quay are still very young Predators. That's why they still have dreadlocks on their foreheads, unlike older individuals who have these dreadlocks fall out over time. But here's the question. Do they fall out themselves, or do Predators pull them out themselves? And he is younger than Quay, but his dryden's are thick on his forehead, and Quay, although older, has only small thin dreadlocks on his forehead. What's to say he's already plucked them out, but they've grown a bit, huh? This means that most likely, Predators in their youth carry out this procedure several times, so that the dreadlocks over time generally stop growing, and thus they will remain bare from the dreadlocks' forehead, on which only points from those places where there were once dreadlocks will be visible. I thought it would be smaller than the video on deck or newer because there is less information about Quay, but after digging a little deeper, it turned out that Quay is not as simple as it seems, but he is also quite an interesting character. It's a pity that the father could not see in both of his sons the qualities of a real Yaoja, Poeston and...